Hello, and welcome to another episode of Game, Develop, Repeat, the podcast where we talk about a game that I enjoy, what makes it special, and what we as game developers can learn from it. I'm your host, Chris, a music educator turned indie game developer, and today's episode is all about Baldur's Gate 3. In this episode, we discuss designing decisions, character motivations, and the scope of consequences. Let's get to it. There are so many things that Baldur's Gate 3 does right. It is not possible for me to talk about everything that this game does well, and if you have any interest in playing it and have not played it, I strongly recommend getting into this game, sinking your teeth in, and just having a good time. It is deeply enjoyable. I'm very happy with it to the point where I am a little bit upset that at some point it is going to end and I will no longer be able to play it for the first time. I'm about 40 hours in, and here's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about the way that they design choices. I'm fascinated by the choices in this game because they are having an impact on me that I have not felt in a game in a while, where it feels like I really have to make decisions and everything that I do is going to be interesting. There's just like this nice layer of intrigue everywhere. Really quickly, this is going to be spoiler free. I will spoil vibes a tiny bit. Like I'll talk about how it feels to be making these choices, and I'll talk about the way that choices are presented to you a little bit, but I will not give you any kind of specific quest stuff. Any situations that I say are going to be hypothetical or made up. I'm not going to talk about any of the character dynamics. I'm not going to talk about like in any real specific way. I'm going to make hypotheticals for that too. I'm not going to talk about the story. I want this game to be fresh for you. I don't want to spoil anything. Having said that, let's leap into talking about these choices. That is hopefully what this whole episode is going to be about, because I mean, there's a chance that I'll get sidetracked, but I would very much like to stick with this one topic because this game is so big in terms of its like scope, and we could sit here and analyze it for days. There's a lot going on, and I'm only like 40 hours deep, and there's already a lot going on. So let's get into these choices. How to explain this? I'm going to give you a hypothetical scenario, okay? Let's say that you just picked up a ring. It's a cool ring. It's a nice piece of gear. It's like +1 to attack rolls or something, right? Great. Then you put on the ring. The end, right? Let's make it a little more spicy. You get this ring. It's a +1 to attack rolls, but some character wants it for some reason. They had a quest. It's like, oh, that ring is my grandfather's ring, and I was really hoping to use it for this, and like, please give me the ring. And you don't know if they're going to offer you any reward or whatever, but you're like, I'm a good guy. This is a game. I don't really need the ring. You know what? I'll give them the ring. We can give them the ring. And then you give them the ring, and they're like, oh, thanks so much. By the way, and then they tell you some info and give you a little reward, and it sends you on another little like mini quest, right? Now it's more exciting. Now let's take it to another level. You pick up the ring, and somebody in your party is like, wait, what's going on with that ring? And you look at the ring, and you look at the stone in the ring, and the stone in the ring has like this black luster to it, but you see like an eye moving underneath the black luster briefly. And then you're like, wait, what is going on with this ring? And then they're like, I don't know if you should wear that. And somebody else in your party is like, no, man, you should wear that no matter what. That ring looks amazing. It's probably going to be great. And then you're like, oh, and then you got to start thinking and make a decision. You're like, well, maybe this ring is going to have huge gameplay consequences, and maybe it's not. And maybe it's just a powerful ring. Like, should I put this on or not? Is it going to be stuck on me? And then one of your party members is like, oh, you can just give it to me. That's the vibe. There's a lot of stuff going on in this game where you go, wait, what's going to happen with this? Is this a good idea? Should I be doing this? Is this decision safe? Is this the best thing to do or the worst thing to do? And I think the number of decisions that this game has where you are like, oh God, this could have huge consequences for the way I play the game, the way I interact with the story, and the characters around me. The number of things that, like, there are so many decisions that feel deeply consequential, and this game does not pull punches. It will show you consequences. It will go, oh, okay, you did that. Now you gotta deal with all these people being upset at you about it, right? You can make the wrong choice and have, without spoiling anything, you can have significant consequences for pretty much any choice you're making, and it can really set you down a different path. I have been so excited about replaying this game because I want to find out how much it really lets you do this. I'm about 40 hours deep. I want to find out if it full on lets you just go wild in completely the other direction, totally off the rails, and it really looks like it does. There have been so many times where I look at it and I go, oh wait, they have a full other plot line laid out for me, just waiting for me, right? They are completely ready for me to only experience one half of this. They are totally ready to let me be the murder hobo. It's marvelous the amount of freedom you have, or it feels like you have, because again, I haven't replayed, so I can't guarantee that I'm correct on this, but it feels like you have the freedom to make some wild choices. And all of those choices, this is maybe the most important bit to me, actually. All of the choices that you make feel like they might be the right choice. Every option presented to you feels like that might be what I want to do. Because the game sets you up with these deeply powerful motivators. It sets you up in this situation where you're like, I really want to figure out how I'm going to navigate this, and I need options. And then it gives you options, and you're like, oh shoot, which one of these options do I take? Who's lying to me? Who's telling me the truth? All these characters are so interesting. Everything in the game makes me go, wait a minute. I don't think there's a moment. No, there's actually been one moment, and I think it's because I'm a fool, but there's been one moment where I went, yeah, no, I'm making the right decision. And I was like, wait, no, I think I'm being an idiot. I think I'm trusting myself a little too much on this one, and this person could turn around on me and really screw me over if they want to. This is, oh my God, the choices, man. Okay, how do I explain this more clearly? I think in a lot of games, there is a clear-cut dichotomy between good and evil. And I think this game gives you one giant gray area and then little slivers of good and evil. It's like, sure, that's clearly purely evil, but also there's a lot of reasons why you might want to do that, and like maybe it's important in the long run, and like it might be worthwhile. And then there's like good decisions. And there's the whole spectrum. Nothing is like black and white in this game. Nothing is super clear cut. It feels like a real world with wild ethical decisions and crazy difficult choices and real consequences. And the ways that they are pulling this off, I do not fully understand how they got away, like how they pulled this off. I'm not they just have some of the best writers alive, I guess. Like I don't know how they wrote these decision trees out and made them all feel so consequential. It's extremely impressive. It is, yeah, they've really honed their craft, and I just want to acknowledge how crazy that is, how well they have put this together, and how intense it is. And now, in a minute here, we're going to have to talk about how to break this down and how to use it in our own games. And that is going to be exciting because I think I find it really funny. Um, there's like this weird, like manufactured Twitter drama where like people are like looking for a thing to argue about. Like there's only actually a few people who are really like discussing this, I think. There's this thing where people are like, oh, don't let Baldur's Gate 3 change your standards for games. And then other people, and they're just like, angrily agreeing with each other about some weird stuff. But Baldur's Gate 3 has changed my standards for games, right? I played this game and I went, oh, this is possible? Are you kidding me? I didn't know this was possible. This is fantastic. How did somebody pull this off? And now I just want to know how they pulled it off. And I want to dig deep. And I'm like, oh, man, there are possibilities in here I didn't know. It's like when somebody broke I don't know what the record is, but there's this thing with running the mile where whenever somebody breaks the record, like a year later, everybody else breaks it. I think that this is a version of that. And I don't think it's going to be a year later. I think it's going to be like 5 years later. But I think they've shown everybody what's possible. And now it's time for people to really start sinking their teeth in and learning lessons from them and going, okay, now what's possible? How far can we go now? Like, they did some wild stuff. Anyway, that's I think let's just start trying to figure out how to apply this to our own games, because the scale of this is the scale of this is fascinating because they are doing this at a very large scale, right? Like there is a lot going on in this game. And it's going to be interesting to try to think of ways to take these lessons and put them into something very small. I feel like I had one more thought. I'm delaying on switching sections because I feel like I had one more thought about this game's gameplay. Oh, it's not just that it's a good and evil, like, grayscale, right? It's that it's a full-on decision-making grayscale. It's not just, oh, this is a good decision, this is a bad decision. That happens in a lot of games where it's just like, oh, good, bad, done. There's also just like so many different ways to solve each puzzle that you run into. There's so many different ways to learn about something, to approach something. Every way that you enter a situation is like, okay. I just walked into, hold on, let me think of it. Let me just make up a hypothetical here. I just walked into a room full of baby dragons unexpectedly, but I'm behind them. Do I fight them? What do I do? Whereas instead, you could walk into a town, talk to a guy, and say, hey, there's this den of baby dragons, and I really want to figure out how to do this. And so, like, if you go in there and you kill them, then you go into town later and you talk to the guy, and you're like, yeah, I kind of killed them. And he's like, oh, shoot, right? Like, you can make decisions before you have enough information, and it can have consequences. But those consequences aren't always bad. Sometimes it's like, sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's a positive thing. In fact, it always feels like no matter how you approach a decision, you're going to get something cool and fun out of it, so you don't have to do this thing where you're analyzing everything and exploring everything before you take action, which is just not as fun. Okay, now having said that, let's talk about this extremely difficult topic of how to apply this to smaller scale games. If there's one thing that we can take from Baldur's Gate 3 and scale down to a point where it's much more manageable and easy to work with, I would say it's character motivations. I think if we look at all the decision tree stuff, it can be a little overwhelming. If we look at all of the grayscale, like making everything approachable from every angle, it's a lot. But one thing that Baldur's Gate nails that is easier to look at, although still very challenging, is the motivation of the characters. I think every character has a very real, very human motivation. And I think that is an important aspect of designing like a story-based game. Now, I am a character guy. I am when I'm listening to an audiobook, when I'm reading a book, when I'm watching a movie, anything like this, I'm all about character development. I'm way into it. I think it's super, super important. And maybe that's just the angle that I like approaching this from. But character-driven story is my thing. Put an interesting character with interesting motivations in an interesting world, and now you've got a whole nother level. But let's take this idea for a second. I'm about to get sidetracked as usual. We take one of these characters, and instead of giving somebody a motivation of like, I'm going to save the world, why does the character want to save the world? How does this character end up saving the world? Does the character want to save the world because he's just extremely arrogant and thinks he can, but he's actually not capable of it? So the whole game is like a borderline comedy about this guy trying to save the world, but actually just messing things up a little bit. And then like somebody else comes along and cleans it up for him, and then he thinks that he's saving the world. That could be kind of fun. But the point I'm getting at, sorry, I got sidetracked there. The point I'm getting at is if it's just like a one-line canned thing that pops in your head immediately, like it could be good, but what is the deeper layer to it? How much depth does this character have? How much stuff is implied? Does this character have some backstory that we're never going to learn about, but it's making decisions for him or her? What are the decisions? Where are these decisions stemming from, right? That is, I think, the biggest thing that we can take without going crazy on the scale. It's a lot easier to write one character's backstory and then have them act accordingly than it is to do this combinatorial explosion thing that happens with Baldur's Gate 3's decisions. Now, here's the interesting bit that I want to tap into. I don't think they're making a mistake that I always make whenever I start thinking about this kind of a game. I start thinking about a game like Baldur's Gate 3. I start thinking about any kind of CRPG. I start designing one in my head, and I start thinking about this branching thing that happens where you start at one place, and then you've got a forked path, and then each one of those forks, and then again and again and again and again. And before you know it, you have several thousand end states for the game, and the game is only 30 minutes long, right? Obviously, they're not making that decision because they finished their game. I think this is an idea. I don't know if this is what they're doing. I don't know. I'm not Larian Studios. Oh man, they killed it. Sorry, I'm just having a moment of being overwhelmed by how well they did with that game. Here's a pitch though. When you have this idea of, I want this game to have a ton of choices and I want every choice to feel meaningful, I think you just give a couple core paths and then a ton of decisions within them that all feel meaningful in their own little locked-in ecosystem, right? So I think what you do is you have your main path. It branches in two directions. Let's just say you have it branch in good and evil. And these are big, hefty branches. You go into the good branch, there's a bunch of little sub-choices and sub-paths and character dynamics and stuff like that within it, but they don't make you create new end states. It just creates maybe another two major paths. And then by the end of it, you have 16 end states maybe, right? But you have all these small little bits of flavor that you can tie into the ending with like a couple lines of text or a little line of voiceover or whatever. That's the thought that I'm having here, because then every single decision that you make does not echo out relentlessly. It just turns into a single little line that you can add if you want to. It turns into a small little Easter egg rather than a giant exploding bomb of just like plot destruction. Do not butterfly effect yourself is what I'm getting at. Don't try to make every flapping of a butterfly's wings affect everything else in the game. Instead, limit these consequences. Say, these actions are only going to have consequences on these parts of the game. This is my theory for how to make it small scale. I have no idea if this is how they're doing things, But this is my theory for how to make it work on a small scale. So let's say that you are just making a little text-based adventure game, right? You have, I can go left, I can go right. Okay, cool, you go left. Left, you have this big town, and there's an evil warlock ruling over it. Right, you have this small village of orphans, and there's a witch protecting it, right? Those are now the games that you're exploring. You were either exploring Witch Town or you were exploring Evil Dragon Town. And then from then, you go to the next path and so on and so on. And you can interact with the other side, sure. Maybe you can switch between the two, but you pick one or the other at some point. That is my feeling about how to limit scope for that sort of a thing. It's still kind of big, but that's my feeling about it. Now, let's talk about this grayscale puzzle design thing where you can approach something from different angles, right? Everything in the game, everything in Baldur's Gate 3 is built in this way where it feels like there are multiple angles of approach, and then they kind of connect in this way where if you finish one angle, then you end up finding the other start of it. It's like a, how do I put this? It's like a maze where every time you get, every exit is also an entrance in a maze, I guess is what I'm saying. Baldur's Gate 3 has set up its stuff to where each quest, sometimes the quest exits are also the quest entrances, and that's super cool. And I think that can be used in small scale. So let's say, even just with a platformer, you can make it so that a level has different approaches. You can kind of do this Metroidvania thing where you can approach from the east, you can approach from the north or the south or whatever, and your goal is to get west, right? You can do that sort of an angle where you've just got multiple points of approach. I think that is pretty reasonable to be able to factor in. The trick is when they're doing all of this stuff all at once. So I think the other catch is limiting scope. So I'd say the biggest lessons to take away from Baldur's Gate 3 are limit your scope big time. Make sure you know exactly what consequences you are allowing something to have. Limit the scope of the game, limit the scope of the consequences and how much they can echo out into other things, and create characters that have a compelling reason to be doing what they are doing. Those are my 3 big lessons. Very quickly, let's just talk about what I've been doing in my own game development, quick little devlog. This week, I was working on sound effects and a little bit of level design, just kind of polishing up a couple things and like putting the levels in order of difficulty, or trying to. It's a little hard to do because I've played it so much that I don't have like a good feel for how difficult the levels are. I tackled a couple really easy to fix long-standing bugs that I thought were going to be hard to fix, and then I went in and fixed them. I was like, oh, that was nothing. Like it took like 20 minutes and I thought it was going to take 2 days. Cool. I think sometimes it's easy to just get caught up in avoiding something, right? For anybody who is new, I'm working on a little platformer called Soot. It is, I'm limiting myself to about a year of development time. It is my first commercial release. I'm actually fairly new to game development. So just to give you a little bit of backstory and in terms of what to expect if you check out that game, there is a demo. The demo is quite old. It needs updated. It's pretty rough. But if you do want to have a glance at what kind of thing I'm working on, that's it. It is nothing on the scale of Baldur's Gate 3. It is nowhere close to that. It is a fun platformer with a little sticking mechanic, if you're curious about it. What I've been doing this week, other than that, is drafting ideas for the next game that I'm working on. I want to do something very small in scope. I want to do like an arcade-style game. I'm trying to do something that I can develop very quickly. I want to try doing one of these like 1 to 3 month dev cycles and see what I can pull off. I've already got ideas for it. We'll see what we can do. That's everything for my devlog portion of the show. Let's wrap this thing up with the final segment. right, we got a couple questions to help you with your own game development. 1, what part of your game is most likely to blow up in scope? And how can you lock the scope down without breaking the appeal? This is one of those things where you kind of got to be a little creative. But if you take the time to sit down and think about it, you can probably lock down the scope and still have it be fun, right? Second one, is your character or are your characters being driven by a backstory of some sort? Do they have motivations? Why are they involved in this? Next, how strong are your core mechanics? The core fun of the game. Is it strong? Is it solid? Is the thing that makes your game enjoyable actually enjoyable? Because I think Baldur's Gate 3 nails that. All right, and then lastly, I've got my tip for the week for sustainability of your whole game development hobby to keep you loving it this whole time that you're working on it, because God, it takes forever to finish a game. The tip is to take time to enjoy games, to not just play the game to think about how much you wish you could make something like this, or not to play it and be jealous of it, or to look at somebody else's success and go, oh my God, they accomplished that. When am I going to accomplish that? And be like impatient about it. No, you take a second, you take a breath, you play the game, and you just go, wow, this is a good game. And you feel like you're, I don't know, like 8 years old on the couch playing a game for the first time. And you're like, whoa, what is this? This is insane. I want that experience. And that's one of the reasons I love Baldur's Gate 3 so much. It is giving me the experience of like, I feel like I'm playing a game for the first time again. I'm like, whoa, this is incredible. How are they doing all this? This is crazy. I'm getting totally immersed in the world. It's beautiful. And I hope, you know, there are going to be other games after this that give me that feeling, right? Maybe there will be, right? And it's just going to be from different angles and to different scales. But I am a little sad that at some point I'm going to be done with my first playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3. But then I'll move on and I'll make my own games and I'll play other people's games and I'll experience new things. And maybe in making my own stuff, one day somebody will play one of my games and be like, whoa, this is really cool. And they'll have some version of that feeling. That's like, that would be amazing, right? Maybe we get there one day. It's a long road, though. We can take our time, and we can just enjoy the process with it. That's everything I got for you. I hope that you enjoyed the episode. If you did, feel free to leave it a rating. Feel free to, like, whatever the things are that help me with the algorithm stuff. You know how it is. You got to say that at the end of the show, apparently. That's everything. Yeah. More important than any of that stuff, I hope that you are creating some stuff, whatever that means for you, whether it's like baking a cake or making a game or drawing a drawing or playing some music. I hope that you're out there creating some stuff, having some fun with it, playing some games, and just enjoying yourself. That's everything. I will see you next time. Have a good one. Bye.